Hello, this is Jeff Segor, and this is the fourth video in a series on how to develop your own web server and web application on your own Wi-Fi network. So where we left off was we had completed installing Elasticsearch and Kibana, which is a manager of Elasticsearch. And I neglected one point that I want to just show you. So let's go into my folder where I've got my Elasticsearch. Within this folder here, I created Elasticsearch 8.3 and Kibana. We had talked about this configuration file, which I went in and modified. With adding this statement in here, which is basically the IP address of my computer. After that first launch of Elasticsearch, it went in and modified and added the security information. So I just wanted to point that out. You could turn the security off by setting these things to false, but the security is good to have. This information is added here. Now, how does Kibana know about? It has to know about this particular address as well. Well, when we did that setup, we gave enough information. It's smart enough to know. Go to Kibana's configuration file. This is its configuration. It went ahead and at the tail end of this, it added this information on the security, and there's the address, so that it essentially pulled out of the Elasticsearch configuration, and the other certificate information that's associated with it, also the token itself. So I just want to point that out, that was kind of added, and so that allows Kibana to automatically work once we sign in. So now the fun part starts. So what we're going to do next, one thing I want to review, we go into here, the concept of this application. And we went through this before of what some of the features are going to be. What I'm going to do next is go into Kibana and use its control window to be able to create these indexes using the schema. So we're going to have a recipe index, and in that index really represents documents for each recipe. And I need some sort of unique identifier. Each of these documents has a unique identifier that is created automatically. It's more of an internal one, but we will use this for various purposes. The meal type will be like whether it's breakfast or main meal or a side or something like that. This will be a pointer, a URL or a web address to if I got the recipe from on the web or some source. And typically I grab one that I like, and then I add my own. I change it around, change the ingredients or add things. Then there'll be a list. This will be an array. An array is basically a collection. It's a kind of a collection of items that'll have the item itself, and then a little description of what that's associated with that. Oops. And then the step-by-step instructions how to do that recipe. I also have an inventory because I want to tie these together. So when I create a shopping list, I know what ingredients I have on hand. It just makes it easier for me when I'm doing the shopping list. And a Boolean here, which is a true or false, whether I have that item or not. It's going to look something like this. This is kind of the goal. I'm going to have sort of a header type menu up here, so I can go to the main pages and I can click on this. Now this I've started. I've actually, all of these recipes we're going to bring in. I have 9 so far. And so that I don't run into copyright things, I want to take pictures after I've made the dish. And so far I've just taken pictures of 2 of these once I get through this, but we just have placeholders for that. Also, when you click on the menu, we'll have something, a notes section. There's the link, there's your ingredients, and then the step-by-step instructions. So we're going to have that. And then with the shopping list page, I want to be able to click on these different categories, have them displayed down here, and I want to be able to just sort of drag these needed items to the shopping list, and then have a button in here that says, okay, print, or bring up the shopping list, some sort, and then a button to clear it. Now, right now, I've started this application. We're going to complete it with this tutorial and go beyond what I have right now. Nothing is really persistent as far as remembering the shopping list from in the website. It just refreshes it each time, but we'll figure out how to do that as well. And let's see. This would be sort of my in-stock list of all the different items. If it's checked, essentially I have it. So then that can be matched with the shopping list when I go out. So you can imagine picking a menu. It needs these ingredients. These are the ingredients that I don't have, and that adds that to the list automatically. I want to have, say a page that gives me some information of what, the type of things that I bought. That's kind of handy to have, and some sort of conversion of units. So that's the goal. So what we're going to do is, since I've already predefined the schemas, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that to our application. Let's now go back and actually I'm going to launch. So this Jeff Recipes is one that is partially completed, and the Jeff Recipes _ tutorial is the one that we're doing from scratch. So I'm going back to here just to pull some files I've already created and put it into our tutorial. So prior to doing this, I'm going to go very briefly. I think it's about time, so I'm going to switch to the tutorial project. And as we noted in the previous video, this thing is pretty much blank. It's using some boilerplate files in here. And so what I'm going to do is, at this point, it would be good to put this under source control. So in the previous video, we briefly talked about installing Git from this website. Now, I've already installed it. There's 2 parts to it. There's what's called a bash version, which is kind of a Unix term for the command line. And then there's sort of a user interface one. And I'll bring those up and kind of show you what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie Git to our project, so that whenever we make changes, we can actually check in these changes. We can commit the changes, which means you put it into the repo, and then at some point I want to put this on a public on GitHub, and it'll go to GitHub to do that. So since we have this beginning of a program, it's probably good to add that in. I'll show you how that's done. So if we go into our source code, by default, when we created this project, Angular created a Git repo for us, but we're not going to be using that because the structure that I made is I want Git to be not at the recipes level, but all the way up here. Because here I'm going to be adding other folders. I want to be able to add source control to things that are besides the project itself. So I'll have documentation probably at this level instead of inside the project itself. And I'll have schema, which defines the indexes for Elasticsearch and other things. Possibly binary things that may not want to check in directly. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go to that directory. I'm going to create a command line. And so we'll come into here. Our project is under recipes tutorial, and these are there's our project there. If you go into recipes, you'll actually see there's this git ignore, and we're going to leave that. What that does is it excludes out certain files or certain Visual Studio Code files that you don't necessarily want to check in. For example, we don't want to check in the node modules. I mean, this is several gigabytes or megabytes, and this gets recreated, so we don't need to check those in. So automatically this git ignore is added when we created the project itself. Now I'm going to go to look at this directory. So let's go to development, and this is kind of an invisible. It's not usually seen. I've turned this on in my window so I can see these sort of invisible files. This is essentially, this .git really attaches this folder to the source control. I'm going to delete this because I want to recreate this Git at this level rather than the recipes level. So I'm going to delete that, and then we come back here, and if I go up a level at this directory here, I'm going to initialize the Git by using this command. Now, what I'm going to do is show you the two. Let's take this out so I can so we can look at our little toolbar down here. When I've installed, when I install Git, there are, let me bring that up as well. I stored that in the applications folder. You'll actually have this git bash. What I do is I drag this down to my toolbar, pin it to that, so I have easy access to it. And then the GUI version of that will be in the command, and I just drag this git GUI. So that's what's represented in my toolbar down here. So if I bring this up, this is a sort of a Unix type command window. It's a little bit more powerful than the DOS window. And so I will use this for doing some git commands from the command line. But I'll also use this GUI version, which this is the graphics user interface. And what I'll do is I'll open up the recipes repository so we can see it at sort of more of a global level. But in order to do that, I have to create this as a repository. So if I go to, I can either do it through the git bash or I can do it from the command line. So I'm in here and I say git and I say init. So it's initialized this repository. So now it's basically empty. We need to be able to put things into it. And typically I use this GUI version of Git to do that. So bring this up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this same directory. So I'm going to navigate to this. Since I initialized that folder to be a Git repository, I'll open this up. Navigate to applications, to development, recipes tutorial, and say I'm going to select this folder and then open it up. Now, in our source control, we're going to have various windows, and there's a kind of a process that we do to check things into this repository. So right now, all these files that we created is not in the repository, and they all appear here, and they're considered unstaged. It goes from a state of unstaged to staged, and then we can commit them, and once they're committed, they're actually in the repository itself. Now they're not in GitHub yet. They're not in the, but they're basically in the repository, which is stored in that .git directory. By the way, the inventor of Linux actually was the inventor of Git. So what we're going to do here is, you notice that there's none of the node modules are included in here, and that's because if you look at the git ignore is a special file that's used to exclude out any files or directories that we don't want to check in. So under here, it's excluding certain types of files, certain types of directories that we don't want to necessarily check in. And you'll see /node modules there. If this was removed, you would see all those thousands, probably tens of thousands of files that are in the node modules. So we may be modifying this at some point. If we don't want to put, maybe we've got some large files we're referencing, we may not want to check those in. So to do the initial commit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say stage change. There's 30 untracked files. And occasionally this happens when we've actually got, say some of the files are open. I'll unlock that. And I'll call this, every time you do a commit, initial commit, you give it a commit message. This will be the very first time. And so I'm going to do this commit. So this basically really means a stage they're ready to be committed, but not necessarily. During the time where you're programming, it might be that you made a bunch of changes and you want to back out those changes. If you haven't committed them, you can essentially reverse those changes. But in this case, I want to commit them all. This disappears. Everything's now clean. There's no staged. Now this is in our repository. Now, the neat thing about the Git GUI is you can actually go in here and look at the history. So this will actually create a tree. You can actually branch your code. So let's say you get to a certain point and you want to experiment. You can create a whole new what's called a branch off. And where you branched off, you could actually continue on So you could be continuing with your development along one branch and experimenting on another. Also, at any point along these commits, you can then bring down that state that you were in, and that's very powerful. There may be a point where you want to go back and see what happened. Maybe something broke and you can't understand. You can go back to a previous commit, see where the break is. So down here, if you click on here, it'll tell you what was changed on here. If I start adding new changes, you'll see those things get stored in the unstaged window. So right now, we've got this under source control. We'll come back to this later. You can also add tags. So one thing we could do here, if we wanted for some reason to get back to the state, we've installed all of these modules and so forth. We might use this as a branch point for another application. So it might be helpful to make a tag, call this, so that's what we could do here. So if you click on this statement here, we can create a tag. And let's say this is like pre-app, which means to me that before we've actually started turning this into a real app. So now I've tagged this. So when we can start making changes on here, we could always come back to this state. And like I said, you can come back to this state and branch off to another type of application if we wanted to. And if there are important points along the line, we'll probably add some tags to it so that you can kind of see how things were changed. Okay, we're done with this. This took longer than I thought. So it will be the next video that will start actually creating the indexes for a recipe manager.